Well, we started in January and we're still here. The General Assembly and a package of legislation that is before the governor to be signed or vetoed is in its final stretch, and the verdicts are in. To veto or not to veto. Governor Spanberger has signed a slate of bills into law and vetoed others that Democrats passed in the General Assembly. What will happen next, and what does this mean for the Commonwealth? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Sarah Claville, and you're joining us for our General Assembly series, To Veto or Not to Veto. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, on this beautiful Sunday morning as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation for none other than WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA. We hope that you all are enjoying your Memorial Day weekend and looking for a very long and good, prosperous, and restful Memorial Day weekend. You earned it. I mean, it was a tough year and long year for all of us. And there's some time to enjoy time with family. You know, you got kids home from college like us, and you got kids home from school, and school should be out, and there are high school graduations going on. So there's a lot happening. So we hope that you are enjoying yourselves and making sure that you take time for family, because at the end of the day, family is precious to us all. Well, you know, we have been covering, of course, as we do on the show, the General Assembly series, and sometimes it runs a little longer than other times. Like I said, we started in January, of course, as we always do here in the Commonwealth, where we open up the General Assembly. And then from there, you know, we get a budget passed. We have sine die, and budgets are passed, and the sitting governor signs or vetoes bills, and there you are. Well, we're here, but we don't have a budget yet, and the governor has signed and vetoed a slate of bills, basically up to the deadline in which he had to do it. And again, this is the governor's first time, not even a full year in office, but first General Assembly. So it's very interesting to see everything that has taken place. Of course, you know, with the big fight with the redistricting arms race that we're having here in the country. And of course, Virginia, we covered that. And of course, the court came back and nullified that and all the votes. And now we're back to square one here in the Commonwealth. Of course, the country is moving forward in their redistricting. Of course, the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken as relates to majority minority districts and coverage and Section 2 and voting rights and things of that nature. But, you know, one thing about the Commonwealth is that, as I say, as Virginia goes, so goes the rest of the country. And, you know, this Democratic General Assembly has really ushered in a lot of legislation to protect a lot of citizens, and even going back to the Northam administration and even up to now. You know, and to have right now the trifecta in government, the General Assembly, both House and the Senate, the Attorney General's office, and also in the governor's mansion, you know, this is a very interesting time. So many people feel that you can get your agenda across the finish line. You know, but sometimes, you know, there is one side and one branch of government doesn't agree with the other. But that's okay, because that's the way a democracy is supposed to work. So what I want to do, I want to go through a series of notable pieces of legislation that the governor has signed into law, and then take a look at some that are controversial that the governor vetoed and, of course, received some backlash from voters and supporters because of that. But again, that's how democracy goes. So according to the Virginia Mercury, Governor Spanberger signed assault weapons ban and a package of criminal justice and energy bills. The governor approved gun restrictions, marijuana sentencing reforms, and measures targeting hospital safety, worker protections, and utility costs. So, according to the Virginia Mercury, on last Thursday, the governor signed a sweeping package of legislation approved during the 2026 General Assembly session, including a ban on the future sale of and manufacture of assault-style firearms, new restrictions of weapons in hospitals, marijuana sentencing reform, voter roll maintenance changes, and protections for immigrant workers. As a matter of fact, the assault weapons measure was one of the session's most contentious bills, and is set to become law after she signed it without amendments she had previously proposed to narrow the legislation scope. The lawmakers rejected those changes during the reconvened session last month and returned the bill to the governor's desk in its original form. So the governor said, I am signing this bill into law because firearms designed to inflict maximum casualties do not belong on our streets. We are taking this step to protect families and support the law enforcement officers who work every day to keep our communities safe. So while the General Assembly chose not to adopt her amendments, she said, my amendments, that specifically carves out certain firearms frequently used for hunting. I will work with the patrons to clarify this language. So Senate Bill 749, sponsored by Senator Aslan Salim, and its companion House bill, sponsored by Delegate Helmer out of Fairfax, prohibit the future sale and manufacture of certain assault-style firearms and ban the sale of magazines capable of holding more than 15 rounds. Now, this legislation marks one of Virginia's most significant firearm restrictions since 2020 and delivers on a major campaign promise from Svanberg, who is a former federal law enforcement officer who has long supported assault weapons restrictions. Now, of course, Republicans did criticize this legislation and predicted legal challenges. House Minority Leader Terry Kilgore accused Democrats of ignoring constitutional concerns raised throughout the debate. He stated that we warned Democrats repeatedly that their gerrymandering plan would be found unconstitutional. They didn't listen. We were right. Again, we also warned them repeatedly that their effort to ban some of the most commonly owned firearms was unconstitutional. They didn't listen. The Supreme Court has already spoken to this. And they listed a case out of New York where Democrats are going to waste even more taxpayer money just to lose again. However, when you take a look at gun control advocates, they said the legislation responds to growing concerns about violence against healthcare workers and is intended to strengthen protections for hospital staff and patients. So this legislation, of course, the gun legislation, gun rights, whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional, Second Amendment has been a major debate for decades and will continue to be. You know, the interpretation of what is the Second Amendment utilized for and how does it apply to everyday citizens. But here, what it says is what type of weapons applies. So, you know, again, individuals use firearms for hunting. You know, now keep in mind, before the invention of gunpowder, I say this all the time, you know, mankind hunted for centuries, you know, like about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years without it. So not necessary to hunt with it, but we do. So I get it. But with that being the case, the question becomes, do you need, you know, various style weapons that you use in warfare, you know, on the streets? When I was in the military, I fired some of those weapons. And let me tell you, I don't know anyone that needs those in their homes or even to hunt with. But again, that debate is going back and forth. It will continue to go. So, of course, the minority leader said that they will file the lawsuit and challenge that. Another piece of legislation that was actually signed, it targets worker protections, drunk driving, and energy costs. So the governor signed a bill which bars employers from retaliating against immigrant workers who report wage theft or minimum wage violation. All Virginia workers, the governor said, should be able to report any violation of their rights without fear of employer retaliation. And she's glad to sign those protections into law. In addition to that, when you take a look at drunk driving safety, another safety measure, it expands the use of ignition interlock devices for certain people charged with driving while intoxicated. The legislation allows courts to issue restricted licenses tied to immediate installation of the devices, which require drivers to pass a breath test before starting their vehicle. In addition to that, when you look at energy, 2 energy-related measures aimed at expanding weatherization and energy assistance programs for low-income, elderly, disabled Virginians. This was actually sponsored by Delegate Bolin, Democrat out of Henrico, and also by Senator Lucas out of Hampton Roads, Portsmouth. The legislation includes provisions intended to shift more infrastructure onto large energy users, including data centers, rather than residential customers. So with this, the higher energy costs we know remain one of the issues that we hear about from Virginians. I'm one of them. You get that Dominion bill like everybody else. And of course, when you look at what's happening, they're wanting individuals to pay their fair share. So the measure extends Virginia's underground power line program through 2033. In addition to that, Dominion Energy has agreed not to seek additional approval from the State Corporation Commission that originally authorized under 2018 Grid Transformation and Study Act. Also, another package signed Thursday formally established Virginia's Clean Energy Innovation Bank to help finance clean energy projects across the Commonwealth. So when we talk about energy and low-income families and elderly, I remember when my parents got older, of course, the house needed a repair, like all our homes need repairs. And I remember they qualified for weatherization. And they came in and steel windows and things of that nature. I mean, it was tremendous. It was tremendous. So these things actually help individuals every single day, keep costs down. So this is very well welcome. In addition to that, she also signed legislation creating process for reviewing sentences tied to marijuana convictions. That's right, for conduct that is no longer legal in Virginia. This legislation, a House bill out of Delegate Henson, out of Woodbridge, and Senator Lucas out of Portsmouth, established an automatic hearing process for eligible individuals convicted of certain marijuana offenses before Virginia legalized possession in 2021. So according to the governor's office, more than 1,000 Virginians remain incarcerated or under community supervision for marijuana-related convictions tied to conduct that can no longer be charged under state law. So under this legislation, courts may modify or reduce sentences unless prosecutors show doing so would not be in the public's best interest. So as the governor stated, as laws have changed in Virginia, it's important to ensure that those who have been previously convicted of offenses under since changed laws receive fair treatment in sentencing review. She also stated that for decades, marijuana enforcement disproportionately impacted minority communities and communities of color, contributing to inequities in the criminal justice system that Virginia must no longer ignore. So advocates, of course, welcome the governor's actions. And according to Chelsea Higgs Wise, Executive Director of Marijuana Justice, she said, "Today we celebrate the work it took to get here to support the over 1,200 people that can receive relief from this bill. People still incarcerated and on probation for past offenses will now have more opportunities for freedom." So the governor has yet to make final action on the proposal of when we take a look at the retail market. But actually, we're going to discuss that next. But Chelsea Wise is definitely one of the major voices in this area. So again, when we take a look at legislation that answers the call of the governor's platform and the General Assembly's platform of campaigning and also champion across the board, here we see where they actually delivered on that, both from a passing in the General Assembly and also supporting this within the governor's office by signing it. So those bills have now become law. But now, not just bills that are signed into law, but there are some that were vetoed. These received high criticism and also raised a lot of eyebrows, not just within the General Assembly, but within the party, Democratic Party, and many supporters. So where do we go from here, and what did the governor say about ICE protections, also retail marijuana, and collective bargaining? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you join us for our General Assembly series, To Veto or Not to Veto. In the first half of the show, we discuss packages of legislation that the governor signed into law, where we looked at energy protection, lowering the costs, and also when you look at criminal justice reform and other areas to protect citizens every day from assault weapons restrictions and banning certain types of weapons where healthcare workers actually work. But there were a set of pieces of legislation. There was a package that the governor actually vetoed, which again received a backlash. So now let's take a look at the first piece of legislation that was vetoed. ICE actions. According to Virginia Mercury, Governor Spanberger's ICE actions deepened divide with Virginia Democrats. The governor vetoed some immigration enforcement limits while signing other protections and issuing new executive order. Just on last week, Governor Spanberger vetoed 2 legislative packages aimed at limiting federal immigration and customs enforcement in Virginia while simultaneously signing other measures targeting mass federal agents and issuing a sweeping executive order governing how ICE officers may operate on state property. Now, of course, according to Virginia Mercury, the mixed actions frustrated and baffled some Democratic lawmakers who argue that the governor is sending conflicting signals on immigration enforcement and other legislative priorities during a period of growing fear surrounding ICE operations across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, of course, this move, according to Virginia Mercury, highlights the careful line that the governor has tried to maintain. During her first 6 months in office, she's repeatedly criticized federal immigration enforcement tactics while resisting proposals she argues could create legal conflicts, public safety concerns, or unintended consequences. Now, the immigration decisions came along a wider set of vetoes, which I mentioned earlier that we're going to touch on, which is the legal cannabis retail. And then also when we take a look at collective bargaining. Now, when we take a look at the vetoes, House Bill 1392, Senate Bill 83, companion measures focus on courthouse security procedures, Virginia access and electronic device policies in Virginia courthouses. Now, the legislation itself focuses on courthouse operations and attorney access. Some supporters and immigrant rights advocates previously argued the measures could also help reduce fears surrounding immigration enforcement activity at courthouses. But the governor rejected the measures, saying she was unconvinced they would improve safety. According to the governor, she said that without additional study or a clear public safety benefit, I do not support mandating a new statewide security screening exemption for attorneys at courthouses. The governor and a former law enforcement official herself stated, she said, any such statewide changes to security protocols should be based on clear evidence that such changes would have no impact on or ideally improve public safety. Now, when you take a look, basically that was immediate criticism from lawmakers in Northern Virginia. They stated in a joint statement, lawmakers said they were deeply disappointed by the veto and argued the governor misunderstood both the legislation and existing courthousing practices. As a matter of fact, the governor stated concern that allowing attorneys to bypass security screening poses a public safety risk, misreads both the bills and the people they cover, arguing that attorneys are licensed professionals subject to state bar, discipline, criminal penalties, and the misuse of credentials, which is true. But the lawmakers also noted that law enforcement officers already routinely bypass courthouse screening procedures. And they also argue the veto preserves what they described as a scattershot patchwork of local rules that creates confusion and delays attorneys and clients statewide. But the governor took several steps aimed at addressing those concerns surrounding federal immigration enforcement in Virginia by signing a couple of other pieces, which would increase transparency and accountability requirements for law enforcement officers operating in the Commonwealth. Now, this legislation, we know, comes in what the Mercury calls national scrutiny over federal immigration agents conducting operations while masked without visible identification. So the governor said law enforcement officers wearing masks on American streets undercut basic expectations of accountability. So fear, confusion, erode public trust. She also said she witnessed the horrors of what can occur when masked federal immigration enforcement agents engage in fear-based policing and enforcement theater on the street. So this legislation, again, increased the transparency and accountability requirements for them. Now, asking basically federal agents conducting operations while masked or without visible identification to identify themselves, basically take the mask off. Now, we all saw that. We all saw it, whether it be in Minneapolis, where the killing took place, ground zero for ICE actions or across the country. Los Angeles and things that are happening across other parts of the country. The Homeland Security measures under ICE have a lot of people on the edge. And, of course, new provisions by that particular division, a department within the federal government has caused a lot of stir, has stirred up a lot of fears, have stoked a lot of worries that this is not the way law enforcement officers should act based upon our Constitution and the like. So with that being the case, there was, again, quite a few lawmakers that issued joint statements out of Northern Virginia, more specifically, that were highly disappointed in that. Now, with that, other Democrats were also upset, or I would say not really happy with a lot of the legislation that the governor vetoed. Matter of fact, they were only part of a larger wave of vetoes that angered Democratic lawmakers. We're going to get into advocacy groups, but we're going to get into two of those in just a moment. But one thing I want to point out is that the governor, what she did order and address ICE activity in executive orders. So she issued an executive order directing state agencies and institutions to establish guidance for employees interacting with federal immigration officers at sensitive locations like schools, hospitals, courthouses, police station places, Commonwealth's Attorney Office. Now, the order bars state property from being used as a staging area, processing site or operational base for federal civil immigration enforcement activity. But it requires state agencies to verify federal officers seeking access to state property possess valid warrants or other legal authorizations. So the order additionally directs state agencies to create online resources explaining residents' legal rights and allowing reports of alleged misconduct by federal officers. So this order follows that veto, which legislation supporters said was intended to further limit immigration enforcement activities in those sensitive areas. So again, another senator said that they strongly disagree with the governor's veto of that bill and is disappointing. Choice that undermines public safety and accountability. The American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia also criticized the governor's decision on legislation. They argued the governor undermined protections lawmakers intended to create for immigrants and courthouse visitors. They also cited ICE agents can make warrantless arrests inside Virginia courthouses, which the rule of law they mentioned was under attack, according to the Virginia policy director there. So, once again, as I mentioned before, when you have a trifecta, you got it. You can get a lot of legislation across. However, sometimes it doesn't work that way. And in this case, it did not. Let's take a look at another big bill called collective bargaining. House Bill 1263. The governor vetoed the landmark public sector collective bargaining bill. It's sweeping legislation that would have repealed historical state prohibitions, but the governor vetoed the bill after General Assembly rejected her proposed amendments to grant localities greater budgetary flexibility. According to various outlets, the bill would have permitted over 500,000 public sector employees across the Commonwealth to negotiate wages, benefits, hours, or working conditions. Now, these are what we call basically service workers across the board, state employees that are minimum wage workers. Well, they can, by allowing collective bargaining and going against right to work, what we have here in the Commonwealth, which the governor says she supports, it allowed them to bond together in a union and collectively bargain. Now, the bill also would have established the Public Employees Relations Board, which is basically a board to review various things to determine bargaining units, oversee union certification, decertification elections, and regulate negotiations. Now, the legislation created the Virginia Home Care Council to represent individual home care workers, providers in collective bargaining. Now, once again, when we talk about home care, we're experiencing that right now. As parents get older, you have individuals who come in and take care of elderly people, or we call sitters. They come and help out. Well, they're not paid that much, and they're not paid a living wage, but they're very important, because without those individuals sitting in the home and taking care of just daily basic needs, waking up, getting dressed, going back and forth to the restroom, bathing, eating, making sure individuals don't slip and fall. I mean, these are very important jobs, but they don't get paid that much. But the governor stands. The governor said that she supported the expansion of collective bargaining rights, but sought amendments to the bill. Now, her changes would require state-level employees to negotiate agreements first to test the system before extending it to local public employees and providing extra flexibility to local budget cycles. However, the General Assembly, who passed the original version of the bill, ultimately rejected the governor's proposed amendments which led to her veto. So because the veto was upheld, existing local ordinances and resolutions continue to govern collective bargaining activities in the state. So once again, that was a big, big disappointment across the board for a lot of union workers that voted for the governor, campaigned for it. And some believe that it breaks the campaign pledge. Again, when you take a look at what the governor, her amendments to it, it gave flexibility. It kind of did a test case. However, these individuals, through the General Assembly, said, we want relief now. So again, you've got, Democratic General Assembly, and you got a Democratic governor and Attorney General, and the legislation did not get through on collective bargaining. So that was a big one. So look at ICE restrictions. We look at collective bargaining. And finally, marijuana marketplace bill. The governor vetoed multiple high-profile pieces of legislation, including one that would have established the framework for a marijuana marketplace in the Commonwealth. The governor said in a statement, I'm grateful to every member of the General Assembly for their efforts during the legislative session. Together, we've taken historic actions to expand paid family leave, medical leave to more than 3 million hardworking Virginians, cap out-of-pocket costs for insulin, enact bipartisan legislation to address rising costs of health care, housing, energy. She also said, with the chaos of Washington continuing to raise prices and create uncertainty for families, look, I've been to the gas station and the grocery store lately, and let me tell you, she's right about that. And businesses alike, we have shown Virginians that we can deliver to make our community safer and stronger and more affordable. However, there came some vetoes. And one of those big actions, of course, we mentioned was the framework for cannabis marijuana. So House Bill 642, Senate Bill 542, companion bill. She said, I share the General Assembly's goal of establishing a safe, legal, and well-regulated cannabis retail market in the Commonwealth. Virginians deserve a system that replaces the illicit cannabis market with one that prioritizes our children's health, safety, public safety, product integrity, and accountability. She said that as Virginia pursues a legal retail market, it's critical we incorporate lessons learned by other states, ensure our regulatory framework is fully prepared to provide the oversight day one, includes clear enforcement authority and sufficient resources for compliance, testing, inspections, robust tools to crack down on bad actors who continue to profit from the illicit market. She said, I greatly appreciate the patrons' time crafting this important piece of legislation. Continued dialogue. She welcomes continued dialogue and collaboration to strengthen this framework ahead of the next legislative session. I remain committed to working with members of the General Assembly, stakeholders, and law enforcement to get it right. In other words, not this time. So, of course, there was a lot of criticism there as well. Others are saying possibly these discussions should have been had during the General Assembly session or even before, knowing that this was going to come up. But that's why the governor has 4 years. So we'll see what happens. We got the next session coming up. We're going to stay locked in. But one thing about what we do here on this show is that we provide you the information so you can make a more well-informed decision. Bringing movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Be safe and be kind to each other. And also remember, your family is precious to all of us. Until next time, be good, be great. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Clavel.